Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John V. has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, everyone. This is a brief introduction intended to for me to say a few words about the gig economy and invite all of you to watch the longer video. It's a two-part video on the gig economy, which has to do with modern labor management relations in the age of neoliberalism of the last close to 50 years now or so. The word gig has been taken from actually the early 20th century, I suppose the 1910s, when jazz musicians referred to a temporary job at a club where they would work for a few days, a few weeks, what have you, on a limited a job of a limited scope, in other words, a limited engagement. That's where the word gig comes from. So it refers to temporary employment, precarious employment. The term became actually sort of popular and linked to the age of to high tech and the age of the internet in the 1990s, about mid 1990s or so, and it became popular also not just in the West but in throughout the world because of globalization. Now, um, clearly, some people who are apologists of the gig economy maintain that it is an efficient way of working and it affords the worker to be more independent and to be his or her own boss, and it permits that individual to do other things with their free time, and at the same time it is a contractual relationship at the individual level between that worker and the employer. It is beyond the scope of labor management relations laws, labor laws. It's beyond the scope of collective bargaining and trade unions, which collective bargaining would mean that trade union, the shop is a union shop. It does mean that the worker is essentially an independent contractor. Okay. In fact, they don't even call them workers. They don't even call them gig workers. They like to call them associates. They call them all kinds of names except workers, what they really are. Um, there are companies that go so far as to call them independent contractors, implying they're like businessmen, although they're in fact workers. And there are companies, large companies, people may be familiar with companies like taxi companies like Uber, for example, companies of that sort. But it's not just them. All sorts of companies use gig workers because they are limited contract employees. They are beyond the scope of labor laws, and they do not receive the sort of benefits that a regular worker, especially a unionized worker, would receive. The question is, of course, why did this all come about after um, 2 centuries of struggles for labor to achieve trade unionization and to strengthen the role of labor in labor management relations. Um, Let me point out that in some form or another, so-called gig workers, in other words, people working independently, freelance, let's use that term, freelance, that has been around since the dawn of civilization. However, from the ancient times throughout and through the Middle Ages and in pre-industrial Europe and the rest of the world, what happened is that all of that work, that so-called freelance work, was at the family, not necessarily only the nuclear family, but the extended family level, considering, of course, that industrialization is a very recent phenomenon. Civilization, by the way, has been around for 5,000 years. The first industrial revolution took place in England in the 18th century, to give you an idea how new this is. Industrialization in the history, in the larger scheme of things, in the history of the planet. And of course, that's just one country in the 18th century in England. West or Northwest Europe, the United States, and Japan, that comes later in the 19th century, of course. So, and then more countries in the 20th and the 21st century. So, industrialization is a new phenomenon. Before that, because there are apologists who try to argue, well, there were always gig workers. Well, when the mom and dad and the grandmother or uncle had the children around working in the farms or tending to the animals, and or the tradesmen in the Middle Ages and beyond that in shops in pre-industrial Europe. They had their children with them, showing them the craft, how to become a shoemaker, for example, how to fit a horse with horseshoes. This was one of the jobs, yes. Um, so all sorts of things, how to make belts, um, how to cut garments, make clothing. All of this was at the family setting. It was not at the corporate level, at the level of a multinational corporation or even a mega company, mega corporation at the national level, which it is today. The thing that's different about the gig workers of the neoliberal era of the late 20th century, very late 20th century, and into the 21st century that we are now, is that the gig worker is really nothing more. There's nothing glamorous about the gig worker. It's nothing more, nothing less than an unprotected worker beyond the reach of labor laws, and a worker who works very hard to supplement their income. By the way, companies actually use that. I just dawned on me. They actually use that term, supplement your income. Drive a taxi, become a security guard, whatever. So you have basically companies trying to appeal to people that this is just supplemental income, um, when in fact, like I said, if we look at the history of labor management relations, there is a reason why for 200 years, from the late 18th century, as E.P., the great English historian, labor historian E.P. Thompson pointed out in his classic work, The English Working Class, there's a reason why workers fought for trade unions, because there were all sorts of issues, from safety, from child labor, from exploitation, especially with regard to girls, but also boys, and sexual exploitation on top of that. So what we have is safety conditions, very unsafe conditions, with workers becoming injured or getting killed, working in the mines, children working in the mines, and with gas explosions down in the coal mines. So you have all sorts of reasons, legitimate reasons, why there are labor laws were introduced, and why the trade union movement emerged to protect the working class. Not to mention, by the way, living standards. Not to mention living standards. If it were up to the employers, the gig worker phenomenon is indicative of that, they would pay below poverty line wages. Below poverty line. In other words, going back to the era of serfdom. But even the serfs were protected. If the lord of the manor was a benevolent lord, they were protected by the lord of the manor. And in many cases, the churches contributed something as well to these people. So the gig economy and the gig labor class, the laboring class, the gig worker, is actually nothing but a symptom of the neoliberal model of privatization and a model of corporate welfare intended to strengthen capital at the expense of workers, extract every ounce of surplus labor from workers and get them, pay them the least possible amount, and be above the reach of the law, beyond the reach of the law. So this is what the gig workers are. Now, I invite you to take a look at these videos on the gig economy that I have done, and um, and to please write comments. And I would also invite you to subscribe to the channel, to this channel. It's an educational channel, and it's managed by Asad Alim. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.